Hi everyone. The goal of this video is to help you understand the explication essay assignment for our class. The first thing that I want to point out in this week's assignments are these two links on poetry explication and a sample poetry explication. So you can get some ideas about, in the first one, how to think through and format your explication. In the second one, see an example. There's also an example in our book. Okay, so in terms of the assignment, your goal is to pick one poem and write an explication essay that analyzes that poem. I've broken this essay assignment down into tasks. If we look at sort of the bottom, your goal, you're going to submit the following: a picture of your annotations on the poem, an informal outline, a draft, and a revised draft. You're going to do all this week, but this is just a 1.5 page paper, so it's not extremely long in terms of the work. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is read and annotate this week's assignments so that you know what explication means. Another word for explication is close reading, so you're looking at a poem line by line, word by word, line break by line break to interpret its meaning. Alright, so the first thing to do after that is to brainstorm. So you're going to choose a poem that you like, that you understand pretty well, maybe the one from the discussion this week. Read the poem again, write down its overall goal or meaning, and then annotate the poem carefully, marking and commenting on poetic elements. So things that you see in the poem that stand out to you in terms of contributing to meaning. So you might see an image that you think really says a lot for the poem's meaning. You want to definitely underline that, highlight it, write a note beside it. You know, this image means this, to clarify. You'll then take a picture of your annotations and upload that picture onto Canvas so I can see what you did. Secondly, you're going to write you're going to write a thesis. Your thesis for this essay should explain the poem's meaning. If you look at the handouts that I just showed you from the reading assignments page, another way to think of it is explaining the poem's conflict and speaker. So who is writing this poem, who are they speaking to, and what is the conflict of the poem? What is it talking about? So here's an example. This is on pages 96 to 97 if you want to take a look at it in your book. Here's my thesis. Natalie Diaz's, this is a long title, Why I Don't Mention Flowers When Conversations with My Brother Reach Uncomfortable Silences, dramatizes the conflict of a family member speaking to her brother about his experiences at war. So basically I'm consolidating the meaning of the poem, the idea that it's getting at, into one sentence. Know that also there's not only one right answer for every poem. Based on your interpretation and your lens, it might be slightly different. I'm more interested in how you support your thesis than actually what your thesis is. As long as it's clear and makes sense, and you can support it, it can work. All right, after you have your thesis, that's a big step, is coming up with kind of what meaning do I want to focus on. And some poems might have different meanings in one poem, so you have to choose the thing that you want to focus on. All right, after that, you're going to compile an informal outline. You've done this before. Basically, you're going to have a thesis and then the main points you want to cover. There are two ways that you can organize this paper, and I just want you to pick whatever works best for you and for the particular poem, because different poems in this book are written in very different ways. So you can either break it down by chronology, so you just go through the poem section by section, or elements, go through it thinking through like all the images in one section, all the sound, etc. If you click here on Outline Examples, you will download my sample sheet. So you'll see here I wrote just a little note to remind you I have two outlines here. You just need one. Okay, so don't do two outlines. The first example organizes it by element. So basically I have the same thesis statement that I said before, and I'm focusing on how she dramatizes the conflict of a family member speaking to her brother about his experiences at war. All right, so I have three elements here. So the first is speaker, the second is imagery, and the third, I'm working on stanzas and lineation. These are all poetic elements that I can break down and analyze in the poem. So when I think about the speaker of the poem and how that connects to the conflict of a family member, right? Because we're always going back to the thesis. The things that stand out to me are first the title. The title itself has the word uncomfortable silences in it. It mentions that she shouldn't bring up flowers. So there's this taboo that's been established in the title itself. The second stanza emphasizes that she doesn't really know what to say to her brother. And the third stanza, there's some dialogue and there's a question that she asked. Were there flowers there? And this is sort of like not really related to war. It kind of speaks to her innocence of how to go about this conversation. She's trying to avoid certain topics, but yet still hits on a memory for her brother. So when we're thinking about the speaker, there's a lot that the poem is saying about the speaker, which connects to this conversation. All right, so then when we go to the imagery, there are a few things I've picked out, about three different quotations to think about. The first is dyed white desert sand crimson, one of the lines in the poem from the first stanza. And this emphasizes contrast of color, and sort of like the red and the blood on the white sand emphasizes this loss of innocence on behalf of her brother, and maybe through this conversation on behalf of her too. So we're going back to the conversation and how this image takes it forward. Next I have the line, the crowd was a hive of disturbed bees. Two lines. Notice if you have more than one line, this is how you do the line break, by having the slash here. All right, this line emphasizes the atmosphere, the anger, the intensity of the moment for her brother and the memory, and the fact that he had no control, in the same way that they don't really have a lot of control over this conversation they're having. Lastly, I have this image of blood burst through the sheet like a path of violets, 100 roses in bloom. The flowers of blood are the only ones the brother thinks of here when he thinks of were there flowers there, right? We're going back to that question that she asked. It talks about the awkwardness of this conversation, that any question that she asked would bring up something awkward potentially. Lastly, the stanzas and lineation. I'm mostly talking about how the way that she uses short stanzas, choppy lines, choppy line breaks, show sort of the hesitation in the conversation, the pauses, the thinking, that start and stop nature. So all of my elements here are playing back into this thesis. All right, so that's one way to organize. The second example would be organized by chronology. We just start from the beginning of the poem and analyze it to the end. I have the exact same thesis here. We're talking about the conflict of a family member speaking to her brother about his experiences at war. So I have two parts. I have the beginning, stanzas 1 to 3, and the ending, stanzas 4 to 9. That's how I sort of broke down the poem, in that the beginning is sort of context, and then the end is her brother telling the story. So in the beginning, the first 3 stanzas, she gives some context of her brother at war. She says, "My brother shot many men, blue skulls from brown skins, dyed white desert sand crimson." I'm talking here again about that contrast between the colors and also the contrast between violence and familial love. So this sort of wanting to connect, but also experiencing difficulty and pain in connection with that. And then also the context of the relationship and the conversation is established in stanzas 1 to 3. She says, "What is there to say to a man? And were there flowers there?" So there's this awkwardness, this innocence implied in those quotations. All right, then we look at the last part of the poem, stanzas 4 to 9. This is where her brother responds to her question about the flowers. So I break it down into parts. Stanzas 5 to 7 are just sort of the basic facts of the incident, that her brother kind of just tells her the story. The woman is stoned to death by men in her family, and I have a quotation here that goes along with it. Then stanza 8 sort of is starting to bring up more of the emotional memory for the brother in the conversation. And it emphasizes the intensity of that moment, the noise he remembers, what he can't take out of his memory. He says the crowd was a hive of disturbed bees. So this particular metaphor here is really powerful in evoking his emotion. Also, in stanza 9, I think this is the crux of the poem. Beautiful language to talk about something so violent and dark and sad. So the blood becomes the flowers blooming in this particular stanza. There's this contrast between beauty and violence, and I think that's kind of like the line that they're walking in the conversation, right? Blood burst through the sheet like a patch of violets, 100 roses in bloom. This is that awkwardness in the conversation, the bad memories, the question, not knowing what to say. So you can see here that I have the same thesis, two different ways of organizing it. You pick whichever way seems to work for you the best. Let's go back to this assignment page. So then after you have the outline, you can upload that. You'll write a rough draft. Aim for just 3/4 of a page. Get some of your ideas down. Then revise that, edit it, add to it, make it at least a page and a half, and then you'll submit your 4 parts to get credit. I did revise the rubric a little bit to go along with sort of the length and the different organization strategies. Like you can see here for the outline, organizes by either element or chronology. Same here, organizes information by either poetic elements or chronology. So that's kind of playing into the rubric. All right, if you guys have any questions about this, please let me know.